Good afternoon, and welcome to Bruin Career Insights, the power of perseverance. I'm Angela Scales, Senior Director of Bruin Connections and Alumni Career Programs here at UCLA. The Bruin Career Insights monthly series is designed to bring you alumni and experts to explore areas of career and professional development. Each and every one of these episodes is powered by membership, so a special thank you to our Blue, Gold, and Life members for making events like this possible. Take a look at the live chat to see how you can upgrade your membership. You can also use that live chat to ask any questions you have throughout the episode. Today's featured speaker is Scott Sakamoto. As a production supervisor at Walt Disney Animation Studios, Scott's passion and experience have centered around the storytelling process. Currently, he is helping to oversee the creative process on a yet-to-be-announced animated feature. His other recent projects at Disney include the Oscar-nominated feature Moana and the theatrical sequel to Wreck-It Ralph, Ralph Breaks the Internet. Scott earned his Bachelor of Arts in Communication Studies at UCLA, and he's currently mentoring an undergraduate student through the UCLA Alumni Mentor Program. Scott, why don't you get us started by telling us a little bit about your journey at UCLA and how you got to where you are today?
Cool, I will. Thanks for the introduction, Angela. Well, it's nice to meet everyone out there. Funny enough, my relationship with UCLA started well before college, or even looking at colleges. You see, when I was 10 years old, I was diagnosed with a VSD, which is a ventricular septal defect, and I needed to have open heart surgery. And I had that surgery at UCLA Medical Center. Now, part of the process for getting discharged from open heart surgery is monitoring your heart as you run on a treadmill. And it was really difficult at first, I remember. But the more I pushed and the more I pushed through it, the stronger my heart felt and the easier it was. And the doctors told me afterwards that when I started, I actually had a little bit of arrhythmia when I started. But the further I ran and the harder I ran, my heart actually got better. And it was just kind of this very metaphorical thing for me where the doctors essentially told me that my heart was the strongest the harder I pushed myself. And it was just kind of this mantra that I took to mean something a lot more for me. And I really took that way of thinking into everything else I approached in life. And so I remember being at UCLA, and my guidance counselor was asking me what major I wanted to have. And I said communication studies. And they said, it's an impacted major. It's something that's really hard to get into. Maybe pick another option. You probably won't get in. And that to me was like fighting words, and that was something that was really inspiring to me. And I was like, well, I'm going to prove you wrong, and I'm going to prove people wrong that don't think I could do it. And it was really a motivational thing for me. And so it was something I did also in my career where I was in advertising for a couple of years. And I kind of knew what I was doing. And I had this really great opportunity to work at a big agency and work on some really great accounts. But it just wasn't doing it for me. And so I knew I wanted to switch and get into entertainment, but it was going to be a huge challenge because I didn't know anyone in the industry. I didn't really study film in college except for a handful of classes. But I knew how much I loved storytelling. I knew how much I wanted to be part of that world building and be part of that industry and be part of the storytelling that goes into all that. And so, it was the same thing. And instead of, really questioning myself too much, I really went all in and all out at it. And I started cold calling every production company and every studio I could think of. And it was literally like, going through the Hollywood Creative Directory at Barnes & Noble and Borders, which were stores at the time that people may not know about anymore, and writing down all of the phone numbers and then calling them throughout the week just to see if I can get an informational interview. And ultimately, I was able to get an informational interview at Spyglass, and that led to an internship there, which led to a floating job in the mailroom at a talent agency. And then that led to a desk at a talent agency, which ultimately got me to DreamWorks. So I was there for about 8 years, and I've now been at Disney for about 5.5. So that's kind of the quick version of how I got to where I am.
Well, I love that, Scott. As a fellow communication studies alumna myself, I can appreciate that grind of getting into the major and how that prepared you for the real world. How did you realize that your passion was in feature animation, even though you didn't have any experience in it?
I think like a lot of people, I grew up really loving animation. I think a lot of people grew up, and I myself loved Peter Pan. I memorized like the whole movie when I was a kid. I loved Robin Hood. I would create a play as Robin Hood all the time. And I would write my own stories, draw my own comics, put on a ton of puppet shows that my family had to sit through. I heard one of them was like 2 hours long, which is probably terrible. But other people may have outgrown animation, but like for me, I loved it way past when it was cool. And there were movies that came out when I was an adult that I just really loved. Like I saw Monsters Incorporated when that was in theaters, and I just loved the idea of taking this idea of children being scared of monsters in their closet and then turning it on its ear, where it became the monsters that are scared of the children. And I just thought that was such an interesting thing. I love the world that they built there, where closet doors become the portal to the monster world. And then that theme of facing your fear and how these amazing relationships can grow from it, and it could even prove to help fix the world. And so I just really loved that film, and I loved like what that could do. Toy Story was the first feature-length computer animated movie, and it was at a time when technology had a really hard time doing hair and cloth. And so they picked this subject in toys that were generally plastic, which they could do in CG, and they found this amazing premise about the life of a toy coping with being replaced, And I thought it was just such an amazing thing, where every older sibling goes through that, and everyone like has friends where you become the second to best friend. Or as parents, you go from like being their favorite to, being second to their peers and their friends. And so I just thought it was so relatable. And so the themes that come out of the medium, I just loved. The world building, I loved. And then, there are songs that just live on for years, for generations. Like Little Mermaid was actually just at the Hollywood Bowl, and that movie came out 30 years ago. So it's just amazing that kids are still singing these songs, and you can still have an impact in this medium, and these stories live on forever.
Exactly. So changing career paths is a daunting process. So what motivated you when you were at the advertising agency to pursue a different path?
Well, it's funny really, because I got a chance to work at a really great advertising agency. I got to work on great accounts like Nestle and Sony Pictures, but it was always like something was missing. And so I found myself going to a lot of different interviews at advertising agencies, trying to figure out what they do differently. Maybe there's something in the field that I could still stick to. And I got offers from those places, and I turned them down, but it wasn't until I was at a friend's desk, and she got a phone call for a job offer while I was standing right there. And she was so excited, she slammed her phone down, she screamed, and she ran down the hallway. And I was like, I need to get a job offer where I feel that excited to do it. And I knew that what I was doing at the moment just wasn't doing that for me. And I had gotten those offers, and it just wasn't the same. So I wanted to find the thing that was going to help me do that.
And how would you say that your UCLA experience contributed to that, or kind of helped shape the course and you feeling the confidence to pursue your passion?
It's funny because it's actually very related to that last story, in that I was a communication studies major, and I took an internship class where once a week we would get together, and there would be a guest speaker that came in, Marty Gregory would oversee, and a lot of times it was alumni that would come in and speak about their jobs and what they do, and do a question and answer afterwards. But this one time, an alumni came in and brought a guest speaker, and that guest speaker was Dustin Hoffman, which was pretty amazing. And what he said to us was, find the thing that you love most. He said, he as Dustin Hoffman would have paid people to act when he was starting out. And he's like, if you guys could find a job that you would pay people to do because you love it that much, you can't help but be successful at it. And so I really took that to heart. So when that girl slammed down her phone and screamed her friend down the hallway, I was thinking, how do I find that job? You know, how do I do that? Because if I could find that job I have a passion for, then I would have a shot at being successful at it.
I'm thinking about how you described the Monsters, Inc. movie, and I think you told me a little story about the passion for that and how it connected with someone who worked on the film. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
About the story part of it?
The part of what you did, given your passion for the movie, and how you reached out to the person who'd worked on it.
Sure. Yeah. So after I had decided that I was going to pursue animation wholeheartedly, I had just seen this movie, but I didn't know what field to go into. You know, it was kind of like this hidden process in making these animated movies. It was like magic, and I didn't know how that was made. And so I watched all the special features and DVDs, and I came across the head of story, who was Bob Peterson of Monsters Incorporated. And I was like, whatever he talked about was so interesting to me, and that process was so intriguing that I wanted to hear more. And so I actually ended up calling him basically every day for probably several months. And Bob Peterson was never at his desk. He was never in his office. And I would always call Pixar's general line and have them transfer me. And luckily, they never second guessed the same voice calling all the time. But one day, Bob Peterson actually did pick up the phone, and he gave me about 10 minutes of his time just to talk about what he did and all that sort of thing. And one thing he said was, you know, as a story artist, you have to draw. Do you draw? And I said, yes. He said, do you draw well? And I said, not anymore. And so he said, well, if it's interesting to you still, learn storytelling. And so find a job where you could read books and read scripts and analyze them and break them down and figure out why they work.
And is that what led you to the job at the agency, realizing that that was a place where you could have that opportunity?
Yeah, you know, I called every studio and production company, and I had already graduated. So none of them wanted to take me on as an intern, and no one wanted to hire me because I had no experience. And so luckily, Spyglass gave me that informational interview. They said, we don't have a spot for you right now, but you know, maybe in the next term we could bring you on. And right around that time, I got an offer from a different studio, and I called them and I said, what do you think of this one? And they said, don't go there, come here instead. And so I was able to intern at Spyglass for 6 months or so, and it was very fortunate, and I got to read a lot of scripts and figure out kind of how the industry works. And I realized that the talent agency is really the hub of all information for the industry. And it was the place to be. It would be the place that I could have the most access to writers, projects, all that sort of thing.
And at this point, you're taking on this internship. Was it paid, or how did you support yourself during that chapter?
Yeah, it was a non-paid internship. So I was there 3 days a week. And funny enough, Spyglass had a first look deal at the time with Disney. And so they were across the street in the feature animation buildings. And I would walk through that commissary as an intern wondering, like, who works in animation that's here? And knowing how I would find them out, but thought would always go through my mind. And then so 3 days a week I would work at Spyglass, and 4 days a week I found a job at Nordstrom at the Grove selling women's shoes. So that was then. That was tough.
It was the perseverance that you were gonna end up in the career that you wanted. So a great question that we got in thinking about the story about Monsters, Inc. was, Dennis asked, I often hear there's a balance between being persistent and being a pest. How did you manage that with your calls to Monster, or with your persistence in terms of getting through to people in the career you wanted to be in?
You know, lucky for me, Bob Peterson was never in his office. And so I don't know if I was really pestering him because he was never there. I was pestering the receptionist, I guess, at Pixar. But I think that just be mindful of the people that you're checking in with, right? Knowing that they have a full-time job and that they have work they have to do. I think knowing that the people that you're going to be tracking down and trying to talk to have like small windows of time to reach out and help other people out. I would just be as prepared as possible going into each of those meetings. Really do your homework, really come up with a list of questions that you want to have answered. I mean, it's actually a practice that I use on a daily basis, which is like any meeting I have, I figure out what's the goal of this meeting? What do we want to get out of it? And I would do the same thing when preparing for these meetings with other people or phone calls or whatnot.
In thinking about your career thus far, what has been your greatest career challenge and how did you overcome it?
I mean, honestly, when I was at Nordstrom and I was selling women's shoes 4 days a week, it was really hard on me. It's not a great company to work for. It's that I knew that I wasn't a salesperson, you know, and my success being dependent on someone else choosing me was really hard. Especially when like your paycheck is 100% from that, you know. And you're so early in your career, there are just so many question marks that you just don't know, like, how are you going to get past it? How am I going to get that shot? But I think it was just kind of like keeping at it and keep pushing through it.
Related to that, we got a great question when people RSVP'd for today's episode from Akemi, and they asked, how did you recover from failures or no's in the industry, especially when you first got started?
So it's a great question. When I was a floater at one of the talent agencies, there was a desk that opened up that's like an assistant position for an agent. And it was this agent that everyone liked. He was really nice. He had a great roster of clients. He's good to work for. The assistants off his desk got promoted at production companies and studios. It was just this really great opportunity. And I was really excited about it. And I had met with him and had coffee with him before that. And I didn't get the job. And I was super bummed out. And I remember being in the mailroom, just kind of like behind all the scripts, feeling like really sad about not getting that position because it was one that I really wanted. And, you know, I really kind of, I met with the manager of all the mailroom employees. After that, I met with the agent. After that, I met with his assistant that was leaving because I just wanted to get feedback on what I didn't do well enough. What was I missing? And sometimes it's a personality thing, but sometimes you can help prepare for it. And I think that to me was a huge lesson in terms of making sure that I was doing my homework before the meeting. Because I was in that instance, I was doing my homework after, and I had prepared for it, but not as much as I could have. And I think had I met with the other assistant earlier, I could have found out what is that agent looking for specifically. How can I make sure that I'm selling that in my meeting with him? What could I do to bolster my skills to make up for anything that seems like shortcoming for the position that he's looking for?
That's great advice. So we mentioned in your intro that you've been a UCLA alumni mentor for a few years now. What would be your advice to current students who are looking to pursue a career after college, and especially someone who maybe is not experienced in entertainment, but will be looking to break into animation or some area of the industry?
I think for any students and even people early in their careers, my biggest advice really would be to stay open to their possibilities. It may not seem like the direct route or the direct job that you want. Funny enough, when I was looking for advertising and marketing jobs, I stumbled across an internship to read scripts. And I met with the person and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. And I didn't pursue it. But had I done that, I might have had a much better head start on my career that I ended up with. At the time, though, I was just so laser focused on marketing and advertising that I didn't even take it into consideration, really. And so I would say, you know, stay open-minded, because some things may not seem like it's the right fit for you, but it actually is way closer to it than you would imagine. Yeah, and even if it's not the route that you're going to go with, sometimes that experience helps color your background enough that it does give you a different angle to talk to. So.
Your area is so popular among our students. We got a lot of questions about, how would someone who maybe doesn't have experience in the field grab your attention with their resume or with their cover letter? So when you're in the hiring process, are there things that Bruins could, highlight in their work, maybe if they don't have the experience, in order to show you that passion?
Some good advice I got about resumes and cover letters was that, they're pretty standard. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend you go and you print yourself on colorful paper and do like a crazy thing aesthetically. I think that the way that you can, the things that stand out to me are the things that make it so there's some insight as to who you are. Things that make it more personal. And it could almost be like a joke, like almost like a funny thing that you add in there in terms of like your interests or your hobbies. Just to kind of make yourself slightly different. Because, when you're starting out for entry-level jobs, it's almost like every resume has like heavy call volume, great at prioritizing things, detail-oriented. And those are all things you need to put on your resume, but what's something that you could add in there that shows a little bit about who you are? And maybe it's your extracurricular activities you do in college, maybe it's the hobbies that you have outside of that or after you've graduated, but I think those things are all very valuable, and it's something that put on there, and then always be ready to talk about it in a very like passionate, interesting way when you do meet with people for the interview.
I love that. So you're, some would say, at the pinnacle in terms of animation. You're at Disney and you've, made it to that role. How have you used perseverance to continued success? Do you see that still coming into play in your day-to-day?
Yeah, I think Disney Animation Studios is like an amazing company. To me, there's something about Disney animation that feels like UCLA basketball, in that they both have like this storied history and this heritage, and it's always trying to find that and come back to it. And so I love the parallel in my college and in my work, and that there's so much reverence to the founding patriarch of those two things, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But perseverance is not something that's just career oriented. I mean, in terms of like the next position, and like I think production supervisor is great, and it's fun, and I love being in the story department and all that sort of thing. But I mean, of course, like I want to produce a movie one day, and so there's perseverance in kind of like continuing to go down that road and pushing on it. And there's a perseverance also in like my day to day, Something that I love about the studio is that there's a true dedication to great storytelling, and it's something that takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, a lot of time, and a lot of effort, and a lot of people have to spend a lot of time working on this stuff to figure it out. And so there is a perseverance on a day-to-day to make sure that the stories that are coming out of our story room are as tight plot-wise as they can be, and the characters are as deep as possible, and the themes are as universal and as emotional as we can make them. And so it's always pushing on that, and I think it's something that we're always working on. So that perseverance, I think, is all the time.
We got a great question in the live chat from Julianne, and she asks, I'm a Broadway performer, but I'm wanting to transition into a more stable entertainment career that emphasizes storytelling, but gives me longevity and structure. Do you recommend getting a master's, or do you have thoughts on the graduate degrees and how that can be a pro or a con in entertainment?
I think it can go either way. I think some people say that doing the mailroom and being an assistant, that's your postgraduate degree. That's your master's. But I know people that have gotten a master's and are in great spots too. So I don't think that it's highly recommend one over the other. I think it's really if you feel like there's an area that you can plug holes in with higher education, then definitely do that. I don't mean to avoid the question. I think it's really up to every person.
So one question that we got throughout many of the RSVP from students and alumni was around motivation. What motivates you at this stage in your career and thinking about what's next and the project that you're working on? What motivates you?
For my own personal career, right, there's a lot of time that you've invested into your career and things that you've missed out on in your personal life that you want to make sure that you are as prepared as that you're going to maximize the opportunities that you've gotten for those sacrifices. And so I think it's motivational to make sure that this time I've spent at work and working on these things is gonna pay off. That's motivational in its own way. But like at the heart of this question to me is that my wife is an occupational therapist at CHLA, and she talks to me about. I always make this joke with her that I might come home and I'd be like, oh, we came up with like this funny joke in Act 2, and she'll say, oh, I taught 2 children how to eat today, and because she's literally saving lives, and we're making jokes, and something that was inspirational to me is that she says, there are so many rooms that she goes into where these kids are watching Moana or they're watching Frozen, and they're singing these songs from those movies or taking on the personalities of these characters to fight these devastating things that are happening in their lives. And the fact that we can be like a small part of that motivation, I think is hugely inspirational for me.
That really leads well into a question we got from Patricia. She asked, what advice would you give your 13-year-old self?
I guess I would tell myself, well, let me tell a story actually, because it was right around this time. I might have been a little bit younger. I might have been like 11. And my aunt, my mom's aunt really, was a seamstress in LA. And she had a lot of clients that worked at studios. And one of them was actually Disney Animation. And so she organized this lunch because I loved drawing as a kid. Like I would go through a ream of paper just drawing things. And she scheduled this lunch and she said, bring some artwork, show it to her and see what she thinks. And for some reason in my head, I thought she's going to give me a job offer if I do really well. And I was like 11 and I showed her the artwork and she was like, this is good. Like, keep going. And I was like, oh, that must mean I'm not good enough. And then, you hear about starving artists and how it's a hard job. And I think if I were to meet my 13-year-old self, I'd say, you could have a totally satisfying life as an artist. It's not feast or famine, and to really pursue that passion. Especially
because in your case, it found its way to your job now, so that's wonderful. We got a question.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a very lucky ride for me, for sure.
Well, we got a couple questions in the live chat similar to those when people RSVP'd around asking, what's the most valuable piece of advice that you received, whether it was professional or maybe it was something you heard in that internship class. What's the most valuable piece of advice you received?
Something that really resonated with me that our president of production at the studio actually gave us as advice was always choose kindness. I think that in any field, no matter what industry you're in or the types of people you're working with, what you want in your schedule and your desire won't always be in alignment with other people. And taking that step back to really empathize with the other person's situation and to choose to be kind and to be a personal person, I think has always been kind of, it's a hugely important thing. And I think, in animation in particular, it's a very small industry. And I think you want to have that reputation as someone that values people as people and that you're a humanitarian in your job. I think it's easy to try and push on people and impress bosses by working people harder or something like that. But it's really about the people, and they're the ones that are they're the lifeblood of your department and your team. And so always choose kindness.
I love that. A great question we got in the live chat comes from Hadley. And Hadley asked, what gave you the courage to leave a full-time career for the unpaid internship and the job at Nordstrom? How did you overcome the fear that it wouldn't work out?
You know, I didn't know if it would work out. I actually had a girlfriend at the time that was wondering what I was going to do if it doesn't work out. Am I going to just be a shoe salesman for the rest of my life? Am I going to go back to advertising? And I think, you know, it was something where I actually really did genuinely lean on some of the Windisms that we learn at school. You know, and it's the peace of mind in knowing that I did the very best that I could do. And so all you could do is focus on the things that are in front of you and be as prepared as possible with those things, and give that your all. And don't worry about if you're going to make it or not make it, because, you know, as Dustin Hoffman said, right? Like if you love it, you're gonna be successful.
Thinking about that quote from Dustin in your class, in the place that you're in today, how do you define success?
For me right now, the way that I define success in my current role is we're working on this movie that's unreleased, untitled, unannounced, right? It's going to come out in November of 2020. And success for me is, you know, is how the world receives this movie. You know, like, are people going to be really excited about it? Are people going to talk about it? Are people going to be buying the books? Are people going to be dressed up as these characters at Comic-Con? You know, like, is my son going to be super excited about this one like he was excited about Moana? That's a lot of the success right now, right? And I think getting through it with this team, with these story artists and with our directors and our writer and all that, you know, like, getting that team to work together to tell the greatest story that we could possibly tell, I think that's truly what success is for me in this role right now.
In thinking about that process and how long it takes to develop and then release an animated film, how do you stay motivated? Or do you have advice around how someone stays motivated when a project has such a long-term timeline, like a movie?
Well, the way that we make movies here is that we actually screen these movies every like 3 months or so. And so you're always motivated because you're always trying to put these movies up again. There's this really amazing story that Glenn Keane told a coworker of mine who shared it with me, which is that there was a classroom, and it was like a pottery class. And the teacher drew a line down the middle of the classroom and said, this half of the classroom is going to focus on making one pot for the next 3 hours. This other half of the classroom, you guys are going to make as many pots as you possibly can in the same amount of time. And at the end of it, we're going to vote on which one's the best, right? And I think intuitively you would think, well, if you get to spend more time on this one pot, like, that's going to be so much better. But what ended up happening was the winning pot was actually from the one that came from the class where they were making as many as they could. And it was because nothing was precious. They were willing to test new ideas, new things, new coloring. And it's that same type of thinking that we're doing when we're working on the story of these movies, where we know that the more times we can put this movie up and the less precious we are about each idea, the better these stories can become. And so it's almost like that process is motivational and inspiring in itself, in that we're always focused on the task at hand with a bigger picture in mind, that we want to make this really great story for the world.
That is a great analogy. I love it. One of the questions we got when alumni RSVP'd, I thought was really neat in light of your career trajectory. What's one thing that you would do differently in that transition when you were pursuing your passion and moving to animation?
It's funny because there's a part of me that was always like, there's production assistants that we hire here that don't necessarily have any entertainment experience. And sometimes I'm like, man, I could have gotten here so much faster. I wouldn't have had to read so many scripts at talent agencies or be a floater or work in the mailroom. I could have made a much easier transition. But the thing is that, I think that stuff helped me. And it made me a stronger production supervisor in story because I had gone through that. So it's hard to say what you would do differently. You know what I mean? I think that sometimes the most direct route is not necessarily the best route. As impatient as I am as a person, I do know that like sometimes the way in which it worked out was almost intended.
Definitely. A question we got a lot and has come up a lot with students that we work with interested in entertainment don't often know what a title means in terms of what someone's day-to-day job. So what would you say what's your day-to-day like? What's a day like working in animation and being in your particular role?
So in animation, it's a long process like you talked about. And the crew could be anywhere from like 300 to 400 people at like the peak time of production of that movie. Within that, there's many different departments, like about 12 or 13 different departments that a film will go through in the process of making these. And the department that I'm in is story. And so I work very closely with our directors, our producer, our writer, our story artists, our head of story, just trying to, like we talked about, put up different versions of these movies. And so my day-to-day is really about kind of keeping that long-term goal of, releasing this movie in November of next year, making it so that all of the asset departments, all the people that are making these characters and environments in CG, know what are the priority things, what are the things that feel like they're going to stick, what are we actually going to make? Because as when you're just drawing it, so many things could be thrown out. But we have to really be able to kind of like identify what are the strong moments in this movie that we're going to be building off of. What things can they move forward with? Simultaneously, we always have our eye on shots. And so shot production is when you actually put that camera in that environment with those characters and you kind of play out the next like 3 to 5 minutes of that movie. We don't always do it sequentially or chronologically as the movie plays out. And so you're always picking and choosing which of those feel like it's going to be a strong candidate to move forward with. So it's a lot of communicating those things. But my 90% of my job is working with our writer and our story team in the story room, keeping us on schedule, pitching in whenever I can in terms of feedback and thoughts on how the story is going, prioritizing what work we're going to be assigning and who's going to be working on it. So my job really is partnering with our head of story, funny enough, like Bob Peterson was on Monsters Incorporated, and work with them to figure out how we're going to put this movie up in 3 months. And what's the best way to do that? What's the right casting for each sequence in our movie? And then just kind of making sure that any changes that come out of different meetings or record sessions or editorial reviews are all being reflected in storyboards.
There's so many different components to it. It leads me to a great question we got in the live chat from PJ. He said, speaking to why you mentioned the pottery story, what are your thoughts on pushing yourself to learn and try new things versus mastering one?
I think when you're early in your career, it's like the time to kind of do a scatter shot and really try on a lot of different hats and try on a lot of different things. Because I think that once you find the things that stick, then focus on those, become the master of those things. In preparation for this call, another thing that we had talked about was any kind of advice for people with younger kids or with people that are just in high school or college. And I was really kind of reflecting on that and thinking about it. And to me, it's really about being mindful of yourself. And when you have like spare moments in time, like an hour or a few minutes or a full day, what do you do with that time? You know, like what are you spending that time doing? What is that? Take note of that and figure out, what does that mean? Like, why is it that you're so interested in that? Why do you default to that? Because it's telling you something to me. It's saying like, that's actually where your interest is. And really focus on those sorts of things and be mindful of it, because it's an interest to you for a reason, and really analyze it and think about why that is.
Now, another question we got speaks to that transition that you made. I thought it was a really interesting question from Tatiana. She asked, were you ever concerned about achieving financial stability in your new job? And did you research how high you could get in your profession before you made that shift?
Yeah, I did a lot of research actually before I made that shift. And animation was always an interest to me, and it was definitely the winner. But once I was at that desk at that advertising agency, and that girl threw down her phone and screamed around down the hallway, it wasn't like I automatically jumped to animation. I really went to a very I wrote down all of the things that I wanted in a job, not thinking about any particular field, but I knew that I wanted to work with people. I wanted to do something that was creative, and it had to be something that was financially stable. So all of these things were taken into account, and then reflecting on the things that I was like kind of doing and the things I would default to, that's what led me to animation. That's when I was more certain of that particular path. But the financial stability is absolutely part of that process. You know, it's something you definitely have to evaluate. And I think it was super hard to go from a job where I had kind of moved myself up in advertising, and to go and not have any real solid income except for commission off of shoe sales.
So before we wrap up, a question that we get all the time, and many alumni asked about this, and students too. When you mentioned research, are there books that you have read or podcasts that you listen to that you recommend that you feel like give great insights, whether it's about getting into animation or just broadly in entertainment, to be best prepared for interviews and for working in the industry?
Sure. One of the books that is always on my bedside table is a John Wooden book. It's called Wooden: A Lifetime of Observations and Reflections on and Off the Court. It is like these little blurbs of advice and information, and it's something that you could just pick up, and if you are super tired and you're gonna fall asleep in 5 minutes, but you want just like a little something, like a little cookie before you go to sleep, it's a great bedside kind of thing. Or if you just need kind of a different perspective on things, it's something that I would open up on occasion. A good book for story process and creative and storytelling is On Writing by Stephen King. The first half of the book is very autobiographical and it's really interesting, but the back half of the book is really all about his approach to characters and storytelling and the process and all that sort of thing. And then there's a book that's really old. It was made by this author, Bob Thomas. Well, Walt Disney Studios was making Sleeping Beauty. So it was made in like the 60s. And it's kind of about the animation process. And the reason I came upon this book, it's called The Art of Animation by Bob Thomas. I came upon it because I was studying Jeffrey Katzenberg's career. And, when he came to Disney with Michael Eisner, Michael Eisner said to Jeffrey, animation's your deal now, you own it. But Jeffrey didn't have any history or any experience in animation. And it was referenced as the book that he read when he got the job. And that was really intriguing to me. And so it's a little hard to come by. But it talks about the animation process, the different departments, what they do, and it has amazing artwork in there that you can't really find anywhere else. But it just talks about the process of why we do what we do in animation. And I think it's one of the only books that was made while Walt Disney was still alive and running the studio.
So as we wrap up, is there maybe one or two things that you feel like Bruins, if there's one thing that they take away from our discussion today, or one tip from your own career path, what would it be?
I think that for me, the biggest takeaway, I guess, would be that there's always more than one way to get to where you're going, and there's always more than one answer. And so whether that's like a small task, here's another stupid story, I'm just tell it, is that I was at an agency and my agent wanted me to make a reservation for her and a client at this very shishi restaurant. And she said it needs to be between 7:30 and 8:30, I think. And so I called the restaurant. I was like, "Can I make a reservation? It'll be somewhere between 7:30 and 8:30." And they're like, "Yeah, we don't do that. It could be in we'll give you guys like a 15-minute window before or after." And I was like, "Okay, well, let's make it then at 7:45." And they're like, "Okay, that sounds good." And so then I got my friend and I had them call to make a reservation then at 8:15. And so one was using her first name and one was using her last name, because then she still had that hour window, even though, you know, there's only a 15-minute window on each side. And I think like that's kind of like, you know, it's a silly thing, but to me there's always more than one way to go about getting the job done that you want to get done. So
that's fantastic. Well, thank you, Scott, so much for this great discussion. We're really grateful to you for your insights and advice about pursuing your passion with perseverance. To everyone who's watching, thank you so much for joining us and participating in the discussion. If you missed a portion of today's episode or you want to share it with others, you can always find the recording on our UCLA alumni YouTube channel. And don't forget to send us ideas for future speakers or topics. Is there a specific career topic that you'd like to learn more about? Send us an email. Our address is careerprograms@alumni.ucla.edu. Once again, thank you to our Blue, Gold, and Life members for making events like this possible. We'll see you again for our next episode in the Bruin Career Insight series. Have a great rest of your day and go Bruins!